We are going to call our little meeting to semi-order. This is Sarah DeSilvi, who is the Director of Clinical Informatics at the Gravity Project. We welcome to you, which will be a very full call. I'm going to say it ahead of time. We are going to review very few updates and proceed to the phase of voting with our education and employment work. Going to discuss some updates of social connection, elder abuse and veteran status, and then review IPV and stress, and then of course updates from our other work streams. We welcome you to this call. Next slide, please. As always, we really appreciate you joining us today. We will do our best to work the chat. Everyone is muted upon entry as usual. We do ask that you remain muted to avoid any background noise or chatter. If you want to participate, and please do, you can chat to everybody, and I will try to integrate your questions into the conversation as we go. I always say this every time, if you send anything directly to me, I'm bound to read it out loud. So if you have personal things you want to share with me, do try to share them in email after the call. To send any kind of comments to everybody, and we can hopefully have a robust conversation today. Next slide, please. This is our standard antitrust practices slide. Next slide, please. We do invite every single person on the call to officially join the Gravity Project. There's the link there, and I didn't mention this before, but for anybody who's new, the links for the different hyperlinks that we're mentioning on the slides will be dropping into the chat as we go. You can see there's already one there. If you want to check whether you have already signed up or whether others from your org have signed up, you can review that at the Confluence as well. And then the Confluence is just a massive assemblance of past work and current work across all of our different work streams and initiatives, and we welcome you to explore it. Next slide, please. A huge thank you to our project founders, grantors, and in-kind supporters. Next slide, please. And then if you're wanting to sponsor, we are actively seeking additional sponsors for 2022. We're funded fully through this year, 2021, but actively seeking sponsors for 2022. If you want to know more about sponsoring, you can send an email to gravityproject@emiadvisors.net or visit the Confluence again, which has some overview and information about the Gravity Project work and how to become a sponsor. Next slide, please. Again, this is the agenda. I briefly detailed it, so we'll go through announcements, project schedule. Really key effort here is to vote on the educational attainment and employment work that we've been doing since August. There's some updates on social connection, elder abuse, and veteran status. And then we are going to cover, again, just a brief update regarding IPV and stress. And then Bob and Dan will take us home with technology update. Next slide, please. There's a lot of announcements. Next slide. I did want to highlight our sister meeting, the HL7 SDOH Clinical Care Fire IG meeting, which happens on Wednesdays from 3 to 4 Eastern Standard Time. Again, just noting that there's a really wonderful white paper out that we helped write regarding everything payers need to know regarding ICD-10, CM, and SDOH code expansion. I would say it's actually the scope and audience is beyond payers, but we were happy to help our friends at Healthify work on that brief. I am wondering, Brian, or somebody who was on the call, if you can give a brief update regarding the webinar you had this morning on regarding the information exchange for human services work.
Sure.
Sorry to put you on the spot, friend. Okay.
That's quite all right. Yes, we had an information session on a new direct trust consensus body for information exchange for human services. Introduced the concept. The most important message from the entire information session is that IXFIS, which is at least how I've been pronouncing IX4HS, information exchange for human services, that ICSFIS is not in competition with any other standards effort. The intent is to give the human services community an opportunity to both explore what their requirements are and to define profiles for how to make use of existing standards such as gravity, such as fire, such as IHE 360X, such as direct trust, direct secure messaging, in ways that meet their specific needs and challenges. And we got a lot of good sort of kumbaya feeling there from folks about how we can all work together to help solve these problems, and in the process to make additional contributions back into the Gravity Project and various HL7 projects, IHE projects, etc.
Brian, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Many of our friends were there, and you are a friend, so there's definitely a common effort in the ecosystem. So we're grateful.
I'm honored to be considered your friend.
Oh, of course. Jeez. I think Evelyn, are you on the call to describe the next two? Evelyn and I are racing meeting to meeting. She is. Do you have anything to say regarding the next three items here? Should we just reference them on the Confluence?
Yeah, they're on the Confluence. It's just more that there's a potential, some are potential grant funding available, and then others are meetings for your awareness. So we're trying to keep track of related items. And then we just got a new announcement too from ONC, just published their support of ONC pilots, of Gravity pilots. So we will bring that up for the next community meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evelyn. Okay. Any other thoughts regarding announcements, or move on to the next slide? Thank you, Lucy, for dropping that in there. All right, so again, there's lots more information regarding everything we said here available on the Confluence via the link. Next slide, please. This is our roadmap. Here we are already midway through October. It's kind of it's the year just courses by, and then we are closing down many of our domains and focusing on the last stress and IPv build until the end of this year. We are actively working on our new 2022 roadmap with our 2022 domains. I realize that many of you all are likely eager to hear what those will be. They do come from suggestions we've had from all of you and from our different committees. We should be able to get back with you in the next month or so regarding what those are, because there's a lot of investment and interest with our executive committee and our strategic advisory committee to try to make sure that work is planned, is structured well, and appropriately resourced. So we'll come back very shortly with additions to the 2022 roadmap, and look forward to continuing our work with you as always. Next slide, please.
Sarah?
Yes?
Oh, perfect.
Hi.
I wanted to say something and we're in question time.
Perfect. Yes.
I just wanted to say to everyone about the work that Gravity has been doing. I've discovered on my rounds that I don't have to explain the Gravity project anymore. People know about Gravity. It's up there now in the pantheon of organizations that people in healthcare and people interested in social justice meted out by social care organizations. We know about Gravity now. It's really remarkable, and I just want to thank everybody for that. Bye.
Lucy, thank you. And I just want to honor again that you've been with us from the get-go, and we're very grateful for all of your insight and your advocacy. Wonderful. Any other questions before we move on? All right, next slide. So much to do. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I promised you all I would get back on some of the thoughts regarding the ICD-10 CM Coordination and Maintenance Committee, and I'm going to keep on coming back. There's a little bit of an update when we sat back and reflected on what we've done so far and what we are going to ask the IC10 Coordination and Maintenance Committee to do. Again, I want to apologize. The formal letter is still being worked on. There's some very detailed recommendations regarding things like inclusion terms that my dear colleague in the Gravity Project, Linda Hyde, and I are working on. But there's some broad concepts I want to talk about right now. Remember, I didn't include all the slides, but the Gravity Project had submissions and there were also collective submissions. So on the next slide, we're going to detail what our thoughts are so far. Next slide. So this is a table that I made. I just presented it to the executive committee a little bit ago. So you can see the first column is the submitter. And there's both us. This is submitted as and without any changes based on our work a year ago. And then there is submitted but edited. If you remember, the Veteran Status Code was combined, history of military service and history of deployment. So that's why it's Gravity edited by the CDC. And we were not part of that editing, so we have thoughts on the editing. And then there was a new term that was submitted by, and we don't know who it was submitted by, but it was included in our presentation as a collective social determinants of health presentation. So far in working with our subject matter experts and reflecting on the work of the community and talking to our committees, we have 3 significant comments right now. Besides, please go forward with everything else. We have basically requests to revisit at the March meeting these three topics for these 3 reasons. So first of all, material hardship. The ask to revisit this really rests on the fact that when we've submitted our request a year ago, we did not know that the CDC would be a proponent of returning the Z58 route of the taxonomy back into use. This is where lack of safe drinking water lives right now. It wasn't even there before. It was all Z58 was retired, even though it exists in the international ecosystem, and everything was put into Z59. So because Z58 is returned, this is the appropriate home for all of the access codes that are not related to financial constraints, so that things don't exist. And if you remember with material hardship, there were you could not have it because you couldn't afford it, and you could not have it because it doesn't exist. So with the return of Z58, it really gives Gravity an opportunity to build more useful ICD-10 that encompasses those 2 routes, not existing in the ecosystem and not being able to afford it. So we're going to ask to pull this back and specify the cause and then revisit it in March. I do feel like everything we've heard from our folks on the ground, that this would actually be better fit for purpose and use, because you'd be able to track interventions better and be able to analyze claims claims data better, because they really are different things. I'm going to say that we don't necessarily have time to go deep dive into this in deep conversation, but I want to ask anybody that has specific thoughts regarding this to send an email. We're starting an ad hoc group across about all of our committees to work on this and ensure everyone's in keeping. But we do want to make sure anyone from our committee that wants to help, our collective that wants to help in that, is able to help in that as well. I do want to just ask for questions though. Any questions on the thought of revising the material hardship code now that we know we can build in Z58? Does that make sense? I know it's kind of technological and abstract, but it was not a figment in our imagination that they would let that return. So now that it's there, we just want to make use of it.
Sarah, why is it coming back in 1 sentence?
Because when we submitted our food insecurity code, it necessarily is separated as Z59.4. That was lack of adequate food and safe drinking water. And that meant that the committee had to figure out where the drinking water term went. And that was determined to be best in Z58. So that basically rebirthed this whole section of the taxonomy that was retired in ICD-10. So now there's real estate there that we can use.
That's amazing.
I know.
You not only influence them going forward, you influence them to realize that the existing structure was inadequate.
Yeah,
with at least some social determinants.
Exactly. And this also mirrors what's exists in the international ecosystem already. So it was a step forward, but it just means that we have some work to do. Thank you, Hasna. Not elsewhere classified, right? And so now NEC means not elsewhere classified. So we have some opportunities. So there's that. And then I'm going to move on to the Veterans Code. So the VA is adamant, as are we, that this is not the correct solution for the need. So we are going to ask that this not be the proposal, and that we maintain the existing code, which is personal history of military deployment, and work with the CDC to figure out a solution that represents veterans. So that is adamantly the opinion of the VA across everyone across the ecosystem. So that is what that statement, it's not very controversial because it so clearly mixes two different types of risk. And then the last one is one that we didn't submit. And we're concerned because this term as currently represented doesn't really have a clear definition, and it includes what are called inclusion terms, which are basically like children of the code that are different across multiple different domains, like underinsurance and medical cost burden, which are actually quite different. So we have on our timeline a proposal to work on healthcare access and underinsurance and medical cost burden. So we would like to pull this back and work on it together with our community and then present it back to the ICD-10 Coordination and Maintenance Committee. So all of these are actually just step forwards, like none of them are actually step backwards. We just want to make sure that the process is followed well. Any thoughts? Okay. Let me know if you want to help. And Hasna, I love that you want to help. I appreciate that you do. Send us an email at thegravityproject@umiadvisors.net email, and then we will get to work. The deadline is next. If you go next slide. The deadline is November 15th. If anyone wants to submit any independent comments from your organizations, you can review the proposal, view the presentation, and submit public comment by November 15th. Yeah, Hasna, I think that it was, I definitely had a epiphany that was something we needed to not miss. All right, and then everything on, when you look at these slides in the Confluence, everything you need here will be available there as well. All right, next slide. Next slide. All right, this is our roadmap. And again, I do promise 2022 domains are coming soon. Next slide. Here we are. We have a vote, we have a review, and we have an identification. So this is a big meeting, and it gets a little simpler after this. As yes, Tom, there's a lot of room there to explore that better. So we have hope after we finish our vote with education and employment, we'll move on to finishing social connection, veterans, and elder abuse next, and then close out with IPV and stress to the end of the year. Next slide, please. Here we are. We're going to vote on our work we've done since August on those two domains. Next slide. There are not actually any markedly new concepts across these. We did want to review them with everybody, and the master's been published since Tuesday. Everything that's new here was discussed in the last meeting, but we do want to let everybody know that even if you're voting and you have concerns, you can always vote yes with comment, and any comment is rectified over the course of the next few weeks. So we did mention that the goals would be both educated to a high school level and receive certificate of high school equivalency. These are already existent SNOMED codes. And then because of the unique curricula that is involved with completion of high school educations, when we think about our plateau goals, like steps towards the end goal, we realized we wanted goals to represent the completion of these steps of these different sub-programs. So this would be the goal. These would be the goals for less than a high school education. I do want to remind folks that this is less than a high school education constrained. So post-secondary education goals and interventions are not part of this set, but they could be part of future work.
Sarah, what is a general educational development program?
That's a GED.
Oh,
Yes. Yeah. And that is the formal name for the GED.
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I have to say it was not the formal name that I thought it was, but it is the formal name. I was surprised that was what the GED stood for.
I would have recognized that. One of the few acronyms that I can still recognize.
Hi, Carrie.
Here,
Yeah.
this is Carrie. Hey, we had a question come up about Washington State has a program that's provided to people in congregated settings, so prisons or people who have been in settings against their will, so maybe for mental health reasons. And it's called Restoration of Competency Training.
Okay.
And we were trying to figure out if that goes under education or if it's going to go under a different different domain.
Well, I think what we can do is
There's a very,
analyze the, sorry, yeah.
there's a very specific program and a specific website that I can.
Yeah, send that along. And I do see, would it be helpful to have the acronym GD? Yes, it likely would. And then, Carrie, if you send, because part of what we have done is if I have the program and the syllabus, oftentimes across, and we're learning this, when we combine like domains, build can be kind of similar across both of them. So you can see basic skills training is here and in unemployment. So when we look at the syllabus, we can see whether it's a novel curricula, right? Or whether it actually could be matched to some of our existing terms. So if you send it along, we'll analyze it.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Okay, next slide. I did want to mention that we do have, because we are talking about education, it seemed important to include different types of education terms, so not just education about programs, but actually representing the act of educating toward learning objectives along with a different syllabus, right? So it's challenging to represent this space, but education's more than just giving, you know, a sheet. Education in the world of education and higher education is all about ensuring the acquisition of learning objectives. So we sculpted these terms to represent that activity. Again, trying to make sure that regardless of where these programs are happening, that the labor involved in actually meeting the need is represented wherever you are. So these are not new this week. We presented them last week as well. And it's all using the language of pedagogy, basically. So you have a syllabus, you have objectives, you educate towards your objectives.
Sarah, could one imagine a domain where one measures whether objectives are accomplished and not just promoted through education? Is that going to be too much to ask ever?
Well, the completion of the program is the representation of the success of the learning objectives, right? In some sense.
So completion cuts across these first four, these first four bullets, right?
Yeah, so if you think about the goal is the completion of the basic skills training program or basic skills, and so that is the end result, and the process you get there is the person is educating you towards the learning objectives. And I don't know if that answers your question, but it seems like it might.
It certainly gets there. So I complete the basic skills training, whatever I had to do for somebody to check that box. It doesn't actually mean that I actually learned anything, but I did attend everything, or I passed all the tests, or whatever the metric is. So completion as a goal is a common goal across all of these concepts.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Thank you.
And digital literacy is digital literacy programs are all of those things, learning how to navigate the internet. It's not actually programming. There's a definition in our, because programming is a little bit advanced. Literacy is like, is a bar of normalcy, like what we can expect for social engagement and completion of social objectives. Advanced digital skills like programming may not be in there, but they may be part of a different training program.
So what about apprenticeships? Where does that fit?
Again, that is a little bit out of scope. If the goal is less than a high school education intervention, we do include
Oh,
training.
sorry.
No, we do include things like apprenticeships in our language for unemployment.
You had vocational training in the last slide, though.
Correct. Vocational training for high school level is a little bit different than an apprenticeship, though, but absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're entirely right. But it's because the vocational education is you graduate with the equivalence of a high school diploma within VOTEC high school programs.
Who issues those diplomas? Is that a state by state function, or is this private enterprise and you pay for it, or a
It's
mix of
usually
both?
district based, like school district based, but there's
Oh.
also funding from the feds.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's like school district administered, but funding from the federal government. And there's federal objectives to meet in order to qualify as a VOTEC program.
So every school district has a bureau whose mission is to do less than high school education interventions.
Every state has less than a high school education interventions. Some districts have programs that are specific, and some are administered by the state.
Thank you. This is all new. This is all new to me, just for my information. Hopefully, I'm not the only one who doesn't know anything about
No,
this.
and the
Thank
great
you.
thing is we do have in our lists, in our program definitions tab, there's definitions and hyperlinks to all of the federally derived program and policy drivers that are associated with each of these concepts. And Haas has done a really good job differentiating digital literacy from advanced digital training. And that is, again, in our definition work. How are we doing?
This is Carrie again. I have a question about this. This basic skills training include special education, or, for example, having a 504 plan?
No, it does not. Well, I mean, it could, I guess, by definition, but you could imagine a Venn diagram where those two things could overlap, like completion of basic skills could be part of a 504 or a special education program, but not like vice versa, right? They could co-occur, but they're not exactly the same thing, right? Because 504s are supportive programs with accommodations based on conditions, et cetera. And again, we're not, the expectation, yeah, I don't know if that's helpful.
I'm just thinking of this term intervention, less than high school education intervention. So say a kid didn't graduate from high school because they never got a 504 plan, or they qualified for special education, but they never actually got it.
Yeah, so then you could imagine it wouldn't be a 504 as administered, right? Because they usually, you can imagine elements that would have been covered in a high school 504 being covered in a basic skills program, but it's not the same thing.
What about people? Are we talking only about adults here? Like, say there's
Yes.
a 16-year-old that has dropped out. This isn't
By
going
definition, we're talking about people that should have been expected to complete high school but have not.
Okay, that makes more sense then. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I think we're good. Okay. Next slide. Bill's saying there's no midterms or changes in clinical status. Correct. Bill is expanding existing SNOMED elements that are the general terms regarding goal status. Our terms that we have regarding our goal statements and our interventions integrate with the work of SNOMED, but they are different. So these are the goals we have. we do want to we talked about this at the last meeting. We are right now including relevant children of some of the parent terms. So there's no hierarchy here in this table, and I'm sorry about that. But underneath self-employed and SNOMED, there are these existing terms for self-employed paid work, self-employed unpaid work, and paid employment. And for right now, it did seem prudent to include any relevant child and to not constrain the set to not include them, since you can imagine them being applicable. They wouldn't be utilized as much, you can imagine, as a simple self-employed, but these do exist, and they do relate to our broad definition of employed that we are following according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We have to work out this is one of those instances where we have to work out the definition of self-employed unpaid work, and Monique actually brought this up at the last meeting. But there is, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics definition of self-employed, you do not always have to be, you can be on the pathway to earning income, but not earning income yet and be unpaid. And then we have all those completion programs again.
Sarah, could you remind, do we have a domain called Civic Participation where volunteerism would fit very easily?
We don't have, we actually can imagine that more as a protective factor or our goal statements function as asset statements. We do have some concepts that cover volunteerism in our goals for our social connection work, right? You can imagine, but we do not have a specific domain for volunteerism because it's not a risk itself. It's like a pathway to address other risks. But we do consider volunteerism social connection within our social connection domain, which is coming up shortly.
From a community health perspective, volunteerism is a positive, it's a strength.
Exactly.
If you do a survey and don't find any, it's something that you want to promote. It doesn't
Yes.
really, I really appreciated the comment in here about volunteer. It doesn't fit under unemployment goals. The person who's volunteering may have, if you say, why are you doing this? The answer may be because I want to, not because I need to make connections to get a job.
Correct. Yeah, and that's why volunteering itself is not in here as an unemployment goal.
Yeah.
But it's represented as in theory within our social connection work as a pathway toward increasing social connection. And then unpaid employment is indeed awkward. So if anybody, we're very careful to exclude terms that are, face and content valid, right? Like meaning that unpaid employment does mean you're employed, only because we are careful to just we just want to make sure we include things that might be in use. However, these are conversations we have when we get to working with SNOMED, as we meet with them weekly, is regarding specific awkwardness of specific terms and unnecessary terms. And we talk often about retirement of terms that are just fundamentally duplicative and not necessary.
And Sarah, given what you've added here, which I think helps, because someone can technically be employed and getting unemployment benefits if their form of employment is an unpaid form of employment, right?
Correct.
So this allows one to at least go further and say, employed in unpaid work. Is there also an in unpaid employment?
We did not. I do not think there is an in unpaid employment.
Okay, just curious.
We can do another. You're very good at finding things, so if we find it, let us know.
Okay, thank you.
And again, there's no difference per se, but again, these are goal statements, so we build them as possible lighthouses or goal statements for when someone is in the risk, which is unemployed. So I would agree with you that it doesn't seem like there's very much difference, but they're both here, and we didn't want to exclude them, as I mentioned before. If anyone has any specific comments, you are free to mention them in the in a yes with comment. How do you document someone working and being paid under the table, e.g. housekeeper paid in cash? That would still be employed, according to the definition we have from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Is someone required to engage in unpaid labor to qualify for government? But Tom, I don't know. I don't know what you mean. We do have a lot to cover. So we've addressed the definition of employed in prior meetings. I do hope to get to the use cases and implementation are all very fascinating, but I do hope to get to the vote shortly. So Tom, can you unmute and help us understand?
There are some federal assistance programs. I think TANF that have requirements that somebody either be employed or engage in volunteer work in order to maintain eligibility. And so if somebody's not being paid, but that's how they qualify for their benefits, do we have a category for that?
We have a, I believe that actually would qualify according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics employed definition, because you're engaged. That would be in line with the voc rehab. And I think if you look at the definition that we have, it includes that status. We can look at it again, though.
I guess the question is more around, do we consider that paid or unpaid?
Oh, because you're working for benefits, that would be unpaid. It seems like you don't exactly earn it's a qualification as opposed to a salary or an income.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Shouldn't employment goals instead be, oh, sorry. By design, we talk about the goals be associated with the risk. So the goals are to be employed, but unemployment is the risk, and it's the goals attached to the risk. So I'm so sorry. It does look odd. Your goal is not to be unemployed, but it's by convention we put the risk and then we put the goal statement. Unpaid work, not self-employed finding feels okay. Well, awesome. Thank you, Monique. Lovely. Okay. Next slide, please. I do want to state that if we want to hold space for the fact that a missing concept is, contracted volunteering, we'll go back to the hopper and see if that needs to be added. If it doesn't seem like it's included in what we have here so far. These are all the programs we have for unemployment interventions. Referral to job center is divided into the 4 different types of things that are happening there: employment training, work readiness, and supportive services, basic skills training, employer workforce development. Someone mentioned community workforce transition. This is a broad program that applies to any transition, whether it be from incarceration to community dwelling, from educational settings to being just a community member. We did not feel there was a significant use case at this time to create specific population subtypes of this. So this is the comprehensive term: voc rehab, legal aid, fair employment. And we did add a new terms for peer support and peer support specialists. So peer support program and peer support specialist, and you'll be seeing these across of our domains. Yeah, we could either say unemployment risk goal or just put unemployment in quotations, but these are all, it's just that we carry the term, we can figure out how to do that conventionally so it makes more sense. Any other thoughts? Okay. Any other questions regarding, okay, next slide. I believe that's the word cloud for Lucy. Okay, we just covered a few updates. I want to just hold space for the fact that Monique's looking for an unpaid work, not self-employed, which is that maybe that actually represents the qualifications for this programmatic eligibility element as well. Maybe you can solve two purposes. And then And then I think that's the primary thing we took away from that conversation. And if anyone, again, has any concerns, oh, the awkwardness comment regarding unpaid employment, absolutely. When we go into the vote, we're going to talk about how to submit some comments so they can get resolved. Next slide, please. So the way the vote goes, if anyone is new to the work, is that there are 4 main votes that you can submit. These votes are submitted via a Google form that will be posted in the chat very shortly, or we can send it to you electronically. I know Sarah Bahal did send an email regarding absentee votes. Yes is the simple yes. A yes vote does not necessarily mean the deliverable is ideal. From the perspective of the community committed member, but it's better to move forward than to block the deliverable. Yes with comment is if a consensus process is when you submit a comment with your yes. So if a consensus process attracts significant comments through yes with comments, it's expected that the comments will be addressed in a future revision of the deliverable. All comments have a time frame to which they have to be sent to Gravity. So 10/21/2021, you email them to gravityproject@emiadvisors.net. Formal objections. This vote also has to include comments that include a path to addressing any objection in a way that meets the known concerns of other members of the project. So you have to also email them to gravityproject@emiadvisors.net. All of these topics are described in the Google form, and you can also abstain. Brian is wondering about veteran education programs. So they're all contained in our veteran domain, which we're going to talk about in a slight bit. Veterans are the one population-specific domain we've covered so far. There is work coming on that, and we work directly with the VA. And then Lucy's mentioning civic engagement. It almost is like an element within social connection. We can talk about that. I think that sounds interesting, actually. Well, it all sounds interesting. Any questions on the consensus voting process? Okay, next slide. All right, so this is going to be dropped into, there's 2 different links. Actually, no, there's 1 different link, sorry. Getting my sea legs, it's been a day of meetings. We hope that you submit your vote by tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're voting on the work we've done over the course of the last few months, which I'm going to say, based on the conversation, there might be a few little tweaks here and there, but I do not want those little tweaks to not to have us miss the amazing amount of effort that you all have put in and our Interventions Council has put in over the course of the last few months. It's Herculean work. Just even imagining all those programs that are critical programs for addressing both of those concerns that are not in the ecosystem yet. It's a really powerful thing. So kudos to you all. You have to press submit for answers to be recorded. We ask that you, if you have a yes with comment or a formal objection, you email those by 10/21/2021. Whew. How are we doing? Has everyone captured the link so far that needs to? Anyone want me to hold on before we move on? We still have a fair bit to cover. I think we're going to go into our whole our whole meeting today. All right, and remember, you can always email us if you did not get the form. We are here for you, and we're very grateful for your participation. I think it's really important to let you all know some updates within social connection and elder abuse. So we're going to do that, segue into that real quick, and I'll pass the mic to Bob and Dan. Next slide, please. Now we're back to review. We were just in vote, and now we're popping back to review. Next slide, please. I'm just going to remind folks what we do in end-to-end review. Hopefully, what we're doing in end-to-end review is this is what we did last meeting with education and unemployment, is look at the set and step back and just ask ourselves questions of the set. And the sets are posted. The questions are there missing concepts? Things that are absent? Are there things that are incorrect or even awkward? Marianne, I want to honor the fact that yes, unpaid employment is indeed awkward. That's a perfect end-to-end review comment. Are there concepts that are unnecessary or redundant and should be removed, right? So we do hope that, just for the sake of tracking, again, because we do have a formal process for any edits for the list we've created, we do hope that you offer written comments in written form, and any rationale and evidence for suggested alternate approaches, and then we filter them up to the subject matter experts. We can and do try to capture some comments from the chat and from the public call. It can just get a little overwhelming to try to make sure we don't forget things. So we do ask that anyone with a brilliant idea submit it via email so that we can make sure it's not lost. All right, next slide. This is the intervention structure. I do want to note that every single time I make this slide, I realize the coaching is absent here, and it's because this is a picture and not a table. It's on my ticket tomorrow morning to add coaching, because we did create a coaching intervention subtype. This is the framework we drop our programs and professions into. Next slide, please. And again, I want to remind folks, I said this before, so we now have sets and repertoires of programs that we reference when we're talking about interventions and goals, such as legal programs or housing programs, and this is to save me from typing. Yeah, so Kristen, if you, sorry, I'm saying this out loud. It looks like it was a private message. If you email gravityproject@enmyadvisors.net and ask for the link, we will send it to you, or maybe we can even drop it in again, and just to make sure that everyone can see it. This is the link to the form for the vote. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a little veterans work. Next slide. I want to thank Charles first from Firm, who's just been an incredibly dedicated member of our community. We met recently with subject matter experts across the VA to review our programs. We have another meeting on Tuesday. So these are the programs that we have so far that will form the core of our really lone population specific set, focusing specifically. Yeah. Go Charles is right. This is the first time we began focus on a specific population of veterans, and so these are all programs that are available to veteran populations. They'll all be dropped into our subset. If anyone has any ideas, let us know. We again meet on Tuesday with the subject matter experts again, and are grateful for their assistance. Next slide, please. One thing I actually forgot to mention there, we really are asking the VA in general to make sure that they lend insight on goals. We kind of come up empty a little bit, or searching for goal statements. And so we're looking forward to that meeting on Tuesday to help us make that more robust. Thank you, Charles. Tom, you do ask about discharge upgrade programs. We did talk about, we did mention that to the VA, and we did talk about addressing discharge upgrade as part of goal statements, and we look forward to talking about it on Tuesday. Our survivors benefit program is a separate VA department. I do not know what you mean. So Janice.
This is Janice.
Janice.
I ended up being on the call. I am a survivor of, a child, and my mother was a survivor. My father passed away. And I received I did receive VA benefits, went to college on them, but yeah. I thought it was a separate program. It's maybe all been rolled into families, but there used to be, and there still might be, a separate program for individuals considered survivors, where they actually paid into a different program. I know they just might have more benefits, so it might be something to look into. I don't know.
We'll bring that to the meeting on Tuesday, and
thank you.
I know Charles will help me remember.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and again, so sorry, that's a very brief veterans update, because there's a lot of work to happen on Tuesday, and we want to make sure that we get to some social connection, goals, and interventions work. Next slide. Lots of things to say regarding, next slide. We did add a new goal really trying to build out the experience of what it feels like to feel the spectrum of social support. And the subject matter experts came up with a new goal, which is receiving as much social support as wanted. And so we're testing this right now, and we present it to you today. Because again, whenever you have these spectrum concerns where there's from nothing to like all of the support in the world, it's difficult to really name where we're heading. And adequate is pretty relative. So just like we tested social contacts are satisfying and sufficient from Tom as a balance to not lonely, we're testing receives as much social support as wanted as a balance to adequate social support. Oh, and my lines are all messed up here. I'm very sorry. So this should all roll down. It looks like loneliness line got a little confusing. My apologies.
Sarah, I don't know how you would measure adequate social support. It's not as though there are metrics out there that
There
everyone
are.
on the
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah,
that everyone on this call would recognize.
but we do.
I guess
we do.
I'm wondering whether social support is an objective condition having to do with health status versus a perceived condition having to do with health status. So are you saying that those are actually two different realities and two different concepts, and people doing the interviewing or the surveying or the talking will know the difference and be able to record differences here?
I am saying that. And the reason why I'm saying that is because in our master list, you can see we codified the different screening tools into whether they screen for social isolation, lack of social support, or loneliness. And so we can imagine futures where if you ask a certain set of questions that are aligned with lack of social support, you get lack of social support as a diagnostic suggestion. Adequate social support could be the goal, and then you would go from there. That was part of our work. It was really quite extensive because social connection has some of these concepts overlapping. But in our master list, we did try to sort things by the type of social connection that was absent or threatened.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
As a patient, I will testify, and everyone here can quote me. I have never been asked questions on this subject. Never.
We ask it in my clinic of every single Medicare annual wellness visit.
Well, you're a paradigm case. I hope other people have experienced or practiced this, and I'm certainly learning about inadequacies in my medical care system.
Okay. Yeah, so their screeners are on there in the master list, and you can see there. Yeah, it's there's some really lovely questions, especially when you're working with older populations, and we're very grateful for our subject matter experts helping us walk through this. Next slide, please. Thank you, Margot. Thank you, Ruth. I just wanted to review again. We had a really interesting conversation, especially regarding some of our need for accessibility in our thinking and comprehensive thinking regarding different needs, regarding these different Medicare approved and paid for interventions. So this is not new. I'm now going to go on to this. We reviewed this last time. I'm going to go on to the next slide. This is the continue. Oh, sorry. If we go back one, I think. We have defined terms for telephone support programs, social groups. You can see this is where the peer support program and peer support specialists came out. Again, these are all in the master with definitions on that first tab. Monique, that's a question. So we are weighing them. We'd love your thoughts if you want to submit your thoughts regarding not lonely as, and social contacts are satisfying and sufficient. Thank you. Look at all these lovely tools. I mean, the community is so smart. I just need to sit back. All right, next slide, please. Again, and then we have specific things. Again, these are all aligned with specific elements in the literature that we know are successful and in addressing the needs. So we have social connection skills building program, social connection resources directory, which is different than the resources directory we have for like 2-in-1 or Unitas, that definition we've had the whole time. Service exchange network, community arts programs, community-based social support for physical activity. Each of these has specific definitions that are aligned with national programs, and you can review them on the master. I want to talk about them more next time we meet, probably. But any questions? Again, these are all evidence-based interventions for social connection concerns. Lovely. Okay, next slide, please.
Sarah,
Sorry. Yes?
I'm sorry. When you put a kid on a horse to develop social skills, there are lots of those around where I live. Are they in here somewhere, and are they worth a separate code? My handicapped child participates in a riding program alleged to be helpful for my handicapped child, and I report this. Is that separately recorded somewhere, and does it matter whether it's separately recorded?
It actually would fall into the definition regarding social connection, physical activity interventions that we had in the previous slide, if it's specifically an effort to improve social connections. If it's referring for hippotherapy, which is different, like physical therapy on a horse, that's a totally different thing. I'm a huge fan of hippotherapy. Like, yes.
Yes.
But
yeah.
Yeah. So, but if it's specifically an exercise intervention for social connection, it would be able to be put under that under the definition on the previous slide.
It's a prelude to ever getting somebody paid who actually does this.
Correct. And so we're trying to build programs that represent the level of effort that's happening. I do want to say physical therapy using horses and equine therapy is a reimbursable service within my health service area. I don't know if it's everywhere.
Okay.
I do want to keep on. Yes, Margot. Oh my God.
Yes.
I saw that beautiful, there was a lovely article regarding kids reading books to shelter dogs, and it was killing me. I'm sorry. Sarah stops being the director.
There are a lot of dogs on this call. I'm just
I know.
concerned.
Sorry. It was like, it brought all the feels. Wonderful. Okay, I'm gonna keep on going, trying to get through. There's a lot you can see that we're working on. Next slide. There's some really exciting things here, though, that I want to talk to everybody about. These are amazing subject matter experts. My word. And then, oh, sorry. Whoa. Back. I think this is. Oh yeah. So there we are. So now we can go forward. There's a lot of goals here because we had an epiphany that represents a kind of a work in progress, and we're looking for your insight, right? So we've always had these adequate safety goals and these resolution goals. And then what we worked on with Dr. Burns, Dr. Burns is Dr. David Burns, who's a specialist in discrete terminology and app-enabled goal statements and care planning for individuals who are experiencing elder abuse. The elder abuse is like a dream person to find. So we worked on kind of developing these granular goals that could, again, work on risk mitigation. So feeling safe is already a SNOMED code. It's hard to not include that because it's something that would come out of an individual's mouth. And then there's these risk mitigation goals: victim separated from perpetrator, victim safe from perpetrator, limited perpetrator access, residents secured, financial security, restorative justice, which is a new term, and enhanced social monitoring. All of these are defined on the master list. And you can imagine some of these being really relevant and shared across intimate partner violence. So the column on the left is kind of the resolution and the kind of halfway point we had imagined of adequate safety. And then our elder abuse experts really pushed back, and they're like, really what we work on is risk mitigation. And as a substance use disorder specialist, I was like, of course, harm reduction. So these terms on the right and the column on the right came out of that. Like, what are we doing to get to the point we want to go to? So everything you see here on the right under feeling safe. And then we also thought really carefully regarding from a harm reduction perspective and risk mitigation perspective, whether we wanted to replace these adequate safety terms, which are very nebulous. You heard me echo this again with some of our other terms, with what it means to mitigate risk, right? Because the truth is almost all the work we're doing in these interpersonal violence domains is about risk mitigation. It's not about resolution, it's about risk mitigation. So we are proposing these terms to basically be what we're aiming for if we're not able to fully resolve the problem. And we felt like in our conversation, it actually was more concrete than saying adequate safety from. But we didn't want to retire anything. So this is where we are right now.
Sarah, it feels like that middle column, and you just said that word, that you're talking about mitigation of elder abuse risk, right? Because otherwise it feels a little like the second one, elder sexual abuse mitigated. It feels like we're leaving someone in a situation where the abuse is ongoing but reduced or something. I think it's a little bit, I know where you're trying to go. I'm not sure that the words are expressing it in a correct way, but that's something we can play with, I guess, in the long run. But that second column, you're saying that you're mitigating the risk of elder abuse.
Correct, because the evidence shows that we actually rarely remove people.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, whether we're what we're doing most often and more often than not, which is why our subject matter experts push back, is controlling risk factors, but people are still at risk and people are still, and it's probably going to cycle back around, but you're trying to make interim arrangements.
Yeah, okay.
And again, so this is all again on the master. We really welcome your thoughts, and we're sending it here for the first time, but please send an email with thoughts or ask to reach out. We're really enjoying working with our elder abuse SMEs on this one.
Sarah, this is going to sound crazy, but what if one of your patients, if you discover that there is elder abuse going on and you say to them, what can I do to help you become safe, or at least to mitigate your risk? And they say, buy me a gun.
Oh, these are the conversations that we have
all the time.
All the time.
So where would that, it might actually mitigate some abuse for somebody to have a gun, or they may be completely persuaded that that's the only way. How would that be addressed by someone raising these questions?
Well, that comes out in safety planning, right? So someone might suggest that, and then you're like, let's talk about that a little bit more. Right. So I don't, that it's unlikely to be the end goal, but we have many geriatricians. I think we have a few geriatricians on the call, and I'm family med. So people suggest things that they think are good, and then we have conversations. This whole process of goal setting is usually a conversation that takes time, right? It takes time. So someone suggests something, I suggest something back, and then we barter and we come up with something. Okay, any other thoughts? I want to get to programs and then pass the mic because I've consumed this whole hour. Okay, next slide. So sorry to take the whole time. So these are all, again, novel elder abuse interventions. All of these come, if you look on the master, they have national level definitions and hyperlinks to them. So adult protective services, mobile crisis unit, life alert, respite, elder care. There are references for elder abuse education programs. We have relief from abuse order, which is a formal term for restraining order. We sometimes use personal care aids as a risk mitigation strategy, National Elder Fraud Hotline, National Domestic Abuse Hotline, which includes elder abuse, long-term care ombudsman. This is for what situations when the abuse is happening in settings of skilled nursing facilities or other long-term facilities, victim advocacy programs, and a new profession of a victim advocate, restorative justice program. Assistance with application with paperwork is a new thing because there's a lot of paperwork to do with transfer of legal power of attorney or guardianship. And then we have a few housing terms because sometimes the safest thing to do is relocate someone. and short-term shelter options apply. And then, of course, all of our legal aid and medical legal partnership codes would also apply. Whew. I think we're actually done almost. Okay, so these are all the programs for elder abuse, and I'm trying to catch. So Tom, we will take the animal therapy concept to our friends at Social Connection, just to make sure we can toss around in the hopper, just so it doesn't get lost. Next slide, please. That is it. Oh my Lord. We did not build a specific subcategory for protective services for special populations at this time. We still are actively thinking about special population considerations. At this time, we're kind of thinking about testing broad concepts and kind of revealing the use for special other subgroups, but we are creating these general referral organization codes where advocates regarding special populations exist. Like for instance, we have Area Agency on Aging, but we don't have the Migrant Justice Program, or we don't have specific, like pride programs where somebody might get specific resources within a knowledge base and expertise from that population. So we're working on that right now just to make sure we have a full set. Because sometimes you're literally just referring to the people that know.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I passed the mic and I used that whole hour. My word. Next slide. So sorry. Oh, next slide. Oh, we're going to go through here. This is just closing out IPV and stress. You can keep on going all the way to tech. Whew. Thank you, friends, for being along that long journey with me. And now I pass the mic to my colleague Dan, and I'm really sorry.
Hey, no worries. This is Dan. I'm going to just cover a quick transition here. I know, and then pass the mic over to Bob. I know there are a lot of new people that join in at different times, and so I just wanted to share a few words about kind of what we're doing here on this tech work stream. You can go to the next slide. And the way I like to think about it is we're working on these technical specifications, but we're doing it through the lens of understanding that really this challenge of interoperability is fundamentally about people, right? It's about people who want these IT systems to be able to work together and understand each other. And it's the people and the organizations first, and then it's the technology approaches that help support the kinds of exchanges that we want. And then on the next slide, I thought I'd just share like, okay, what the heck, terminology and tech stuff, how does this work? And the simple sort of expression I like to use is that it's like chips and salsa, okay? So FHIR is this exchange standard, this mechanism by which you can deliver semantically juicy, and tasteful content to go back and forth between systems, but it's really sort of a hand in glove kind of relationship. The terminology helps provide the meaning. It's the FHIR interchange standards that provide the structure and the techniques for the computers to be able to do that exchange. And then in the next slide, I just want to say we recognize that there are a lot of you on the phone who may be interested or working on specific parts of the solution. And we just want to reiterate going forward and all the time, we want your feedback. And it may be that you're looking for and working on, the entire solution, or maybe just particular pieces of it. Regardless, as you look at it and have questions, comments, suggestions for improvement, we definitely want to hear from you. There are a few ways you can do that depending on what the feedback might be. But one sort of handy way is through the HL7 issue tracker. I've put the link here, and this would be for sort of a trackered specification that gets logged and tracked. So on the next slide, I'll show you just an example. It's pretty simple. You can get to a forum, say, hey, I have an idea about a technical correction or a request for a change or even a question. And you can just search for SDOH and the FHIR IG will come up and then record your stuff there. This one way, but a structured way that gets tracked and documented. And I wanted to make sure that you all heard that kind of open invitation that we're looking for feedback. With that, I'll hand it over to Bob to kind of walk us through where we are and where we're going.
Okay, Dan, thank you very much. So this is the roadmap and where we are. As we have talked about before on the public calls, we published an ST1 for the SDOH implementation guide back at the beginning of August. We're in the process of both testing it and looking for pilots. We have organizations that are stepping up to implement this as part of their own roadmap for how they're going to achieve interoperability in their communities. We're right now working on expanding out the scope of the implementation guide to finish what we had started, candidly, to include the individual and the community-based organization using applications, along with some additional terminology capability. So we're working on that right now with the intent of finishing it up at the end of November and going to ballot in January. That'll create a version 2 of the guide that includes everything that's already there, plus some additional support for individual application and CBO applications. We're updating the reference implementation guide at the same time so that we have proof that the guide works, the additional changes work. It's how we do internal feedback and something to test against the connected funds. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is, we've seen this before. As we said, we finished the ST1 of the implementation guide and published it in August. Next slide, please. What we're doing right now is focused on STU2, and we'll go through a brief summary of what's in STU1. It includes support for assessments, link-coded risk assessments, and the ability to create those as questionnaires in FHIR, deliver the questionnaires, again, using NLM tooling, and ultimately to represent that as observations and condition resources or health concerns and problems in the FHIR representation. We have the ability to establish those health concerns and problems based on the implementation, the execution of a risk assessment, or directly between the provider and their patient in a conversation. We have the ability to go and support the exchange of patient-created goals, support the exchange of patient consent, and provide a closed-loop process with the performer of an intervention. So this is an intervention or a service request, and we can close the loop with them to indicate not only when it's done, but also interim status. We have one representation within that implementation guide of how to create a cohort of the individuals. In this case, what we're doing is we're showing how you create a cohort of individuals that have a common payer. More than likely, the expansion of that concept will be a separate implementation guide focused on public health and research, the idea of creating cohorts for things like public health and research. So that's what's in the current implementation guide. What we're working on right now are revisions based on implementer feedback. We've had some, and some experience at Connectathons, enabling communication from a patient or client application so they can participate in the referral process and report outcomes via questionnaires as to their experience in the service that was rendered and its ability to go and meet their needs. We're also enabling CBO referral management for applications. Up till now, we've assumed that anyone that participates in the exchange is FHIR enabled on both ends. We're now assuming that there are applications that are not going to be FHIR enabled. They're going to communicate with FHIR APIs, but they themselves will not be FHIR servers. We're looking at the support of social services, taxonomies and terminologies, with the ability then to exchange between the various participants, not just the medical terminologies, SNMID-CT, ICD-10, CPT, HCPCS, LOINC, but also to exchange other terminologies that make sense. So in other words, if you're mapping them externally, we now have the ability or will have the ability to support the exchange of both a clinical terminology and a social services terminology. We're providing some additional guidance on how to deal with things like race and ethnicity, including some comments on if you collect it with consent and the requirement to report it in certain states. And then finally, we're specifying how one can synchronize these applications with the appropriate FHIR server, FHIR API, much like we do with Outlook and multiple mail systems, or CMS is doing with the Patient Access API and personal health applications. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic of what we're doing right now. You've seen this before. As we said, the current implementation guide supports assessment surveys, health concerns, goals, interventions, and documents what's done as procedures supporting consent and supporting aggregation. And we show the various terminologies that Sarah's been working with, Sarah's group, defining assessments as LOINC-coded, defining health concerns and problems as ICD-10, CM, and SUMED-CT, goals as LOINC and SUMED-CT, and then interventions and procedures as kind of a combination of SUMED-CT, CPT, HCPCS, and to the extent it's required, we support LOINC for additional detail. Next slide, please. This is the survey process we talked about, the ability to take a LOINC survey panel, convert it using NLM tooling into a questionnaire, a FHIR questionnaire, administer the questionnaire, again, using NLM tooling, and then ultimately represent it as a questionnaire response and show how to convert that into observations, which allow you to search for questions and answers, as well as condition resources pre-coded with SUMED-CT and ICD-10 that can be confirmed and promoted to problems on the problem list. Next slide, please. We do this picture at the beginning of the year looking at how we can support all of the interactions among the various players in this space, the various organizations, providers, payers, government entities, coordination platforms, community-based organizations, and ultimately the patient or client that's receiving the service. With the initial work in ST1, we're really supporting the blue lines. So the ability to go and exchange information between FHIR-enabled organizations. It was our intent from the beginning to support all of these interoperations, interoperable exchanges, but we had to complete what we started and make it available for implementation. Now we're into the second phase. Next slide, please. As we said, we support the ability to exchange a consent resource. We're not defining how you do consent, we're defining how you exchange consent. In the case we showed in the implementation guide is the exchange of a consent resource between a covered entity, a provider, for example, and a business associate, indicating to the business associate they have the consent of the patient to release information to non-covered entities or non-business associates. That's a fairly straightforward use case. We've had requests on our calls that we should be able to go and exchange that consent resource across basically all the players. So if someone collects consent, they should be able to exchange it to someone else that is being given the consent of the individual to use or release that information. And so we'll look at how we might do that in this version of the implementation guide. Next slide, please. So the STU is focused on the red circles, finishing off the interactions here, the ability to go and, as we say, support the exchange for a patient or client application and workflow to close the loop and to report patient-focused outcomes. Then the support for CBO applications and workflow. That's a little more complex because we have multiple patients from multiple clients that need to be managed. So we are providing guidance on how that exchange works. And then the automatic synchronization we talked about, and the support for social services terminologies or taxonomies. So that's the focus of the STU2 version. Next slide, please. I think we're done. We did have a connectathon at CMS in July. We had about 40 participants. That was really testing the STU1 version of the implementation guide. We had a connectathon in September. We had about 40 participants, again, from 20 organizations. That was focused on not just testing the STU1, but testing a number of these exchanges that are part of the next version of the implementation guide. The exchange, for example, with a patient or client-based application. Next slide, please. These are the participants in the September track. We had fairly broad participation, and we appreciate that. We're now looking for organizations that want to come to the table and test with us. Let's see if the next slide talks about this. One slide more, please. Nope. So we're going to do a testing event during the first 2 weeks of November, testing the new capability of the implementation guide. For those of you that are capable and willing to bring to the table applications that you can use to test these exchanges, we'd love to have you participate. Our goal is to make sure that we've tested the new capabilities before we take them into ballot to the extent possible and incorporate the learning from those testing events.
Bob?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. Could you go back to that slide that had orange circles on it that I think represented the potential for a single consent to be shared across, yeah, this one, for a single consent to be shared across a number of organizations. From my consumer patient point of view, I'm just wondering about, and this may be out of scope for this discussion, so just tell me out of scope right away. But from my patient consumer point of view, signing a consent form is always laborious. They get longer and longer. And I'm wondering about how, as a community, we address whether patients understand consent when it's intended to be shared by to any entity that the person caring for them thinks is relevant. The bank, probation, child protection, the DMV, for all I know, because I'm old and getting blind. So how is that, what is the platform for addressing whether patients understand consent of this nature?
Incredibly good question. Let's go back 2 slides if we could, please. Right here. So all we're doing right now is defining how you exchange a consent, not what the consent contains. Consents contain policies, okay? Policies on releasing information or restricting the release of information. We're defining what that exchange looks like, not what it is focused on. It
what
may
contains.
be you, for example, saying, I don't want to exchange the fact that I have a limited vision that came out of my work with the DMV. That's fine. We're not doing that. We're saying if you exchange it, here's how you exchange it. That's all we're doing. So your question is a really good one. It's why we stopped where we did. And that is, what are the standards we use for collecting consent, making sure that the individual understands what that consent means, and where that consent has an impact on which elements get shared, how do we appropriately identify them? How do we tag the data? We're not going there right now. There's a lot of work going on, as you're probably aware, at HL7, trying to identify things like data tagging and detailed consent. There's work going on at ONC. We have decided at this point, now we can always change based on feedback from our stakeholders, but we've decided to wait until they land the approach they're going to advocate nationally that covers both healthcare and social services before we take another step in trying to define the consenting process. Does that make sense, Lucy?
I appreciate that explanation. I understand that everything everything that you and your colleagues talk about in our sessions has to do with how, and not necessarily saying why or what. So I appreciate that, and how has to be done. I just can't help but leaping from how to whether anyone is going to understand this at the beginning of the process. So thank you.
Agreed. I think it's one of the biggest problems that we have in consent and data tagging is getting people to understand the implications of decisions they're making. And there are both positive and negative implications. If I restrict too much information, I may not get the appropriate service. If I allow too much exchange, I may be exposing myself to risk. It's a real, there are no good answers. The question is, how do we minimize risk and maximize benefit? Other questions, comments?
Bob, it's Mark with a question.
Yeah.
I don't know why this hadn't occurred to me before, but consent is often implied. So under HIPAA for treatment, payment, operations, what in those situations where something is implied and perhaps the patient is not asked, is there anything that's exchanged?
Well, there would be no requirement to exchange anything between a covered entity, which is what HIPAA applies to, and a business associate, which extends the HIPAA requirement to that organization. So there's no requirement there. There is a requirement in general that you're supposed to exchange the minimum information necessary to meet the use case, the requirement. So, the intent is not open access to all records. The intent is access to those things that make a difference. In the case of social determinants of health and social risks and social interventions, one would normally make the case that you don't need much of a clinical record. You might need some clinical information if you're dealing with specific diets or specific conditions, but in general, you don't need access to the broad clinical record. What you need is access to some, contact information and some, reporting information. So minimum necessary would pretty much dictate a relatively skinny record from a clinical perspective. Does that make sense?
I was more just thinking of what was the absence of exchange doesn't mean the absence of consent.
Well, there's no standard.
You could have an empty field. Nothing is exchanged because it was implied.
Well, within healthcare, within covered entities and business associates, we have relatively clear process.
Right.
When it goes between a covered entity and a non, we're in the wild, wild west. And outside completely, we're in the wild, wild west. So between, two social services agencies, that's all governed by effectively state regulations, assuming there are any.
Okay. Thanks very much.
So there's not much you need for that information electronic. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for confirming that. Tom, for many years developed the general framework to consent management is a really difficult issue. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. It is a very difficult issue, which is why we would prefer to have those organizations that are already focused on it get their work to a point where we can adopt it into our implementation guide as opposed to try to create it ourselves. Okay, other questions? Dan, did you have anything?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay.
Back
what's
to
the next
me.
slide? Or is that the end?
It's yeah, here we are.
There we go.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, go back to there we go. Next slide. Perfect. Okay. Another very full hour and a half of Gravity Project public call. We have a few action items regarding the vote for employment and education. Submit your votes, submit your yeses with comments for anything that you feel like needs to be revised. We heard some ideas. We want to really make sure that they're logged. So that's again regarding employment and education, and the form for voting was put into the chat, and it's due tomorrow evening, 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We want you to review and add insight to the social connection and elder abuse elements. I did put in the chat. We can easily imagine a companion animal program, which is different than a service animal program. And so I'm going to take that forward and bring it back to the subject matter experts. There's, did a quick search regarding national definitions. They exist. I think it'd be really easy to put that forward. We do try to differentiate between therapy programs, which are specialized, and broad interventions. So I think that will work. Submit any concepts for IPB and stress, please. We want to get those masters going. We have lots of our vested subject matter experts have returned, and we're very grateful. We do meet with our veteran status subject matter experts on Tuesday. And as always, we are so grateful for all of your investment in this work. Thank you for staying with us this whole hour and a half. Yes, my dear Lucy.
Sarah, this homework page would be so helpful to get as an email for those of us who can't be doing this 24/7 the way you and Bob and so many other wonderful people are. To have this collected in one place instead of having to go to the Confluence page and try to figure out which domain I'm interested in and where are we in which domain. Is there any possibility of just extracting this slide and sending this to all of us right after this meeting so that I can tag it in red and I know that I have to do this, or at least some of it.
Oh, I think that sounds great to do right after this meeting. Sarah, I do want to give credit to the amazing Sarah Bahal, who includes these elements in our Tuesday email. But what I hear you saying is that's too late. Like you want it, so maybe
what we can do late. And it's not highlighted. Just this page.
Just this page. Okay. Look at Rebecca Goodwin's here. Hi, Rebecca. Sorry. I don't see friends until there's like little icons that come up of their little thumbs or whatever. So hi, Rebecca. So yes, we will work to do that. That seems easy enough. We make the slide, we can drop it in. Of course, I'm volunteering the labor of the amazing Sarah Bahal, but I will support Sarah in doing that because I hear you.
Thank you.
And great, Alex. I'm glad that it was helpful. We do appreciate our merry band. We're doing amazing work together. All of you all are the heft of this work, and we're so grateful for your attendance and your commitment to our mission. So I hope you have a lovely weekend, even though it's Thursday. Any other final thoughts before we go off? Oh, welcome,
Thank you, Sarah.
first timers. All right. Okay, so review your master list on the Confluence. We will see you soon. I'm grateful for everybody for coming, and we see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Another great job.
Thank you.